The sound of ice cracking beneath her feet echoed across the frozen landscape like a gunshot, and Theresa Owens felt the world tilt sideways as the creek swallowed her whole. The water was so cold it burned, stealing the breath from her lungs and turning her limbs to lead as she thrashed against the current that pulled her beneath the surface. She had been walking the shortcut back to town, clutching her satchel of herbs from the trading post, when the deceptively snow-covered ice gave way beneath her boots. Now the frozen creek in the high country outside Hillsboro, New Mexico, was dragging her downstream, her heavy wool skirts weighing her down like an anchor. She opened her mouth to scream, but water rushed in, and darkness crept into the edges of her vision as her body went numb. Kade Irwin had been tracking an escaped mare through the wilderness when he heard the splashing. His head snapped up from the hoofprints in the snow, his breath misting in the frigid December air of 1882. The sound was frantic, desperate, completely unlike the steady flow of water over rocks. He spurred his gelding toward the noise, his heart pounding as he spotted the dark shape struggling in the partially frozen creek. Without hesitation, he swung down from his saddle and waded into the icy water, gasping as it hit his thighs. The current was stronger than it looked, fed by mountain snowmelt despite the winter freeze. His hands closed around fabric and he pulled hard, dragging the woman toward the bank. She was limp now, her face pale as death, lips blue. He hauled her onto the snowy shore and turned her on her side, pounding her back until water gushed from her mouth. She coughed violently, her whole body convulsing as she struggled to breathe. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and filled with terror. "You are all right," he said, though his own teeth were chattering. "You are safe now." She could not respond, shaking so violently he worried she might break apart. Kade looked around quickly, assessing their situation. They were 3 miles from Hillsboro, the winter sun already sinking toward the horizon. She would not survive the ride back in wet clothes. He needed to get her warm immediately or she would die anyway. "Can you stand?" he asked, but she just stared at him, her awareness slipping. He cursed under his breath and scooped her into his arms, carrying her to a cluster of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind. His own clothes were soaked from the waist down, water already freezing on the fabric. He laid her down gently and ran back to his horse, grabbing his bedroll and the spare wool blanket he always carried. His fingers fumbled with the ties as he worked. When he returned, her lips were moving but no sound came out. "I need to get you out of these wet things," he said, trying to keep his voice steady and professional despite the urgency of the situation. "You will die if we do not get you warm. Do you understand?" She managed the smallest nod, and he turned his back to give her privacy. "Can you manage it yourself?" There was no response. He glanced back and saw her hands shaking uselessly at the buttons of her dress, her fingers too frozen to work. He took a deep breath and moved to help her, keeping his eyes on his work and nothing else, his movements efficient and respectful. He peeled away the layers of soaked clothing, wrapping her immediately in the dry blanket, then the second one, cocooning her completely. Her undergarments were still damp, but it was better than nothing. His own wet pants were freezing to his legs. He stripped them off quickly, wrapping himself in his duster, and then pulled her against his chest, tucking both of them into his bedroll. The situation was improper by every measure, but propriety meant nothing when death was the alternative. He rubbed her arms through the blankets, trying to generate warmth. "Stay awake," he told her firmly. "Tell me your name." "Theresa," she managed through chattering teeth. "Theresa Owens." "Kade Irwin," he replied. "Where were you headed? Back to town?" "I was gathering herbs up at the Anderson place. Thought I could cross the creek." Her voice was barely a whisper. The ice looked thick, Creek runs fast there, he said. Ice never freezes solid. You are lucky I was nearby. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Lucky. I feel like death. You will feel worse before you feel better, he said honestly. But you are alive. They sat huddled together as the sun dipped lower, and gradually her shaking began to subside. Kade kept talking, asking her questions to keep her conscious. He learned she was 22, had come to Hillsborough 6 months ago after her parents died back in Missouri. She worked at the general store and did healing work on the side, having learned herbalism from her mother. She lived in a small room above the store, alone. What about you? She asked, her voice stronger now though still weak. Why were you out here? Tracking a mare that broke out of the McCready corral, he said. I work for them managing their horses. The mare is valuable, carrying a foal. Cannot let her wander off and get herself killed. Did you find her? Not yet, but I found you instead. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you. I would have died if you had not heard me. Yes, he said simply, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. As full dark settled over them, Kade knew they had no choice but to wait for morning. Riding in the dark over unfamiliar terrain could injure his horse, and Theresa was still too weak to travel. He built a small fire using branches from the sheltered area and hung their wet clothes nearby to dry. The flames cast dancing shadows across Theresa's face, and for the first time he got a good look at her. She had dark auburn hair that hung in wet tangles past her shoulders, and striking green eyes that watched him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. Her features were delicate but strong, the face of someone who had known hardship. You should eat something, he said, digging through his saddlebag. He found some dried beef and hardtack, not much of a meal but better than nothing. She ate slowly, mechanically, and he could see exhaustion weighing on her. You should sleep, he told her. I will keep watch. What about you? You must be exhausted too. I will manage. He settled with his back against a rock, his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. She was quiet for a long time, and he thought she had fallen asleep, but then her voice came soft through the darkness. I thought I was going to die. I could not feel anything, could not make my body work. The water just kept pulling me down. But you did not die, he said firmly. You fought. I heard you fighting. I was so scared. Fear is natural. It keeps us alive. She was quiet again, and this time sleep did take her. Kade kept the fire fed through the night, dozing only in brief intervals, always alert for danger. Mountain lions prowled these areas and wolves. But the night passed without incident, and when dawn broke gray and cold over the mountains, Theresa stirred and sat up. How do you feel? He asked. Sore, tired, but alive. She looked at him with those remarkable green eyes. You stayed awake all night. Someone had to. Their clothes were mostly dry, stiff from the cold, but wearable. He turned away again while she dressed, pulling on his own clothes that felt strange and rigid. When they were both decent, he helped her onto his horse and swung up behind her, his arm around her waist to keep her steady. The mare would have to wait another day. The ride back to Hillsborough took 2 hours, and Theresa sagged against him for most of it, her body still recovering from the trauma. When they finally rode down the main street, heads turned to watch them. A man riding in with a woman held close in front of him would set tongues wagging, but Kade did not care. Let them talk. He helped her down in front of the general store, a squat wooden building with a false front that proclaimed Morrison's General Goods in faded letters. An older woman came rushing out, her face creased with worry. Theresa, where have you been? I expected you back yesterday afternoon. I fell through the ice at Crow Creek, Theresa said, and the woman gasped. Mr. Irwin saved my life. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha Morrison, took over then. ushering Theresa inside with clucks of concern and promises of hot soup and a warm bed. But before she disappeared through the door, Theresa turned back and met Kade's eyes. "Thank you," she said again. "I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing," he replied. "Just take care of yourself." He touched his hat brim and turned his horse away, aware of the eyes still watching from doorways and windows. The story would spread through town like wildfire. Respectable young woman. Cowboy she barely knew. Night alone in the wilderness. The implications would be whispered in every parlor and over every fence. Kade rode back to the McCready Ranch on the outskirts of town, a sprawling operation with good grazing land and sturdy corrals. He found the escaped mare without much trouble now that it was daylight, and led her back safely. His boss, Samuel McCready, listened to his explanation about the delay with raised eyebrows. "Saved the Owens girl, did you? That will make you popular with the ladies in town." Kade just shrugged and went to tend the horses. He tried to put Theresa out of his mind, but her face kept appearing in his thoughts. The terror in her eyes when he pulled her from the water. The fragile trust when she allowed him to help her. The soft sound of her breathing as she slept by the fire. He did not see her for 3 days. He worked the horses, mended fences, did all the tasks that filled a ranch hand's winter days. But on the 4th day, when he rode into town for supplies, he saw her standing outside the general store, sweeping the wooden walkway. She looked up as he approached, and a smile broke across her face. "Mr. Irwin, Miss Owens." He dismounted, suddenly unsure of himself in a way he had not been since he was a boy. "You look well." "I feel well, thanks to you." She set the broom aside. "I have been hoping to see you. I wanted to thank you properly, not just in passing." "There is no need." "There is every need." Her voice was firm. "You saved my life at great risk to your own. That deserves more than a quick word of thanks." She hesitated. "Would you join me for dinner? Tonight, if you are free. Nothing fancy, just a meal. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage something decent." He should have said no. A single woman inviting a single man to a private dinner would cause even more talk, but he found himself nodding. "I would like that." Her smile widened. 6 o'clock. The outside stairs lead up to my room. That evening, Kade washed thoroughly at the bunkhouse, put on his cleanest shirt, and rode back into town feeling foolish and nervous. The stairs led to a small landing, and she opened the door before he could knock, as if she had been watching for him. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and she wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. The room was tiny but tidy, with a narrow bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a stove and shelves lined with jars of dried herbs. The smell of something savory filled the air. "It is not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious, "but it is mine." "It is nice," he said honestly. "Comfortable." They ate stew with fresh bread, and the food was better than she had promised. The conversation came easier now, without the urgency of survival driving it. She told him more about her life before Hillsborough, about growing up in Missouri with parents who had loved each other deeply. Her mother had taught her about plants and healing. Her father had taught her to read and think for herself. "They died within a week of each other," she said quietly. "Influenza swept through our town. I tried everything I knew to save them, but nothing worked. I think my father just gave up after my mother passed. He did not want to live without her." "I am sorry," Kade said, meaning it. "What about your family?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to share. "My mother died when I was born. My father raised me on his own, worked as a ranch hand all over Texas and New Mexico. He taught me everything about horses. He passed 3 years ago, just got old and tired. Since then, I have been moving from ranch to ranch, going where the work is." "Do you like it?" "The moving?" He considered the question. "I did. Lately, though, I find myself wondering what it would be like to stay somewhere, to build something instead of just working for someone else. What would you build? A horse ranch, maybe. Small but good. Breeding quality animals, training them right. I have saved some money. Not enough yet, but maybe someday. They talked until the candles burned low, and when Kade finally rose to leave, Theresa walked him to the door. In the narrow doorway they stood close, and he could smell the lavender she wore. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I have not had many friends since I came here. People are kind but distant. You are the first person who has made me feel like I could belong." "You saved my evening from being very dull," he said, trying to lighten the moment though his heart was beating hard. The bunkhouse conversation generally involves which horse kicked who and whose turn it is to cook. She laughed, a real laugh that lit up her whole face, and he found himself smiling back. He rode away that night thinking about her laugh, the way her eyes sparkled with intelligence and humor despite all she had endured. He thought about the courage it took to leave everything familiar and start over alone in a rough frontier town. He thought about how right it felt to sit across a small table and talk with her about everything and nothing. He told himself not to be a fool. She was young, pretty, and clearly capable of making her own way. She could have any man in town once word spread about her skills as a healer. He was just a cowboy with a horse and a bedroll and some money saved in a bank. But despite his practical thoughts, he found excuses to ride into town more often. He needed nails. He needed coffee. He needed to check on a saddle repair that did not actually exist. Theresa seemed equally glad to see him each time. She would step out of the store when she saw him, and they would talk for a few minutes before propriety demanded they part. He learned she was trying to build up her healing practice, but people were slow to trust her. They still went to old Dr. Hayes for serious matters, came to her only for simple things like cough remedies or burn salves. "They think I am too young to know much," she said with frustration. "Or they think a woman cannot be a real healer." "Give them time," Kade said. "They will learn." The opportunity came sooner than expected. In mid-January, a child in town developed a serious fever that Dr. Hayes could not break. The boy's mother, desperate, came to Theresa in tears. Kade heard about it from the ranch hands, how Theresa had sat with the child for 2 days straight, using cool compresses and herbal teas, coaxing him to drink when he would take nothing else. The fever broke on the 3rd day, and the child recovered fully. After that, people looked at Theresa differently. She was not just the young woman who worked at the store, but the healer who had saved the Cooper boy. More people came to her with their ailments, and she handled each one with competence and compassion. Kade felt proud of her, though he had no right to. But he also worried because he could not stay away from her, and the more time they spent together, the more the town talked. Martha Morrison, who had been kind to Theresa, began making pointed comments about proper behavior and reputations. Other women, those who had not been as welcoming, whispered behind their hands about loose morals and improper attachments. It came to a head on a cold February evening. Kade had stopped by the store after work, and Theresa invited him up for coffee. They had been careful to leave the door open, to maintain propriety, but it did not matter. When Kade came down the stairs, 3 women from the town council were waiting, their faces set in disapproving lines. "Mr. Irwin," the eldest said, a severe woman named Prudence Hartford. "We need to speak with you about your relationship with Miss Owens." "There is nothing improper about our friendship," he said evenly, though anger simmered in his chest. "Friendship between unmarried men and women leads to speculation and ruin," Mrs. Hartford said sharply. "Miss Owens came to this town with nothing and we gave her a chance. She works for the Morrisons, she has a place to live, But her reputation is being damaged by these constant visits. People talk. People always talk, Kade said. We have done nothing wrong. The appearance of impropriety is as damaging as the act itself. Another woman chimed in. If you care for her at all, you will stop these visits. Unless, of course, your intentions are honorable and you plan to marry her. The words hung in the cold air. Marry her. The thought had crossed his mind more times than he could count over the past 6 weeks, but he had pushed it away. He had little to offer her except hard work and uncertainty. She deserved better than a rootless cowboy. But looking at these women with their pinched faces and judgmental eyes, thinking about Theresa upstairs probably hearing every word, he felt something solid settle in his chest. My intentions are completely honorable, he said clearly. And yes, I plan to marry her, if she will have me. The women looked startled as if they had not actually expected him to agree. Mrs. Hartford recovered first. Well, that is a different matter entirely. You should speak with her properly then and soon, before more damage is done. They swept away, leaving him standing alone in the street. His heart was pounding. He had just announced his intention to marry Theresa Owens to half the town gossip network, and he had not even asked her yet, had not even told her how he felt. He took the stairs 2 at a time and found her standing in the doorway, her face pale. You heard, he said. I heard. Her voice was shaky. You do not have to do this, Kade. You do not have to marry me to save my reputation. I can handle gossip. I know you can handle it, he said, but I meant what I said down there. My intentions are honorable. They have been from the start. He took a breath, trying to find the right words. I did not plan this, did not plan any of it. But from the moment I pulled you out of that creek, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. The way you smile, the way you talk about your work, the way you face everything with such courage even when you are scared. I am just a cowboy, Theresa. I do not have much to offer you, but I am hardworking and honest, and I would do my best to make you happy. Tears were streaming down her face now. You pulled me from death, Kade. You gave me warmth when I was freezing. You stayed awake all night to keep me safe. And since then, you have been the best friend I could have asked for. Do you really think I have not been falling for you too? Hope flared bright in his chest. Then you will marry me. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, her face pressed against his chest. He stroked her hair, feeling the miracle of this moment. 6 weeks ago, she had been a stranger drowning in freezing water. Now she was going to be his wife. They married 3 weeks later in the small church at the end of Main Street. It was a simple ceremony attended by most of the town, the residents of Hillsborough always eager for any break in the winter monotony. Theresa wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Kade wore his best suit, brushed clean of trail dust. Martha Morrison cried openly during the vows, and even Samuel McCready looked moved. They could not afford a honeymoon trip, so they spent their first night as a married couple in Theresa's small room above the store. It did not matter that the space was cramped or that the wind howled outside. They had each other, and that was enough. In the morning, reality set in. Kade still worked at the McCready Ranch, sleeping in the bunkhouse most nights. Theresa still worked at the store during the day and saw patients in the evenings. They were married but barely saw each other except on Sundays. It was not the life either of them wanted. We need our own place, Kade said one evening as they sat together in her room. Somewhere we can actually build a life together. With what money? Theresa asked practically. We are both working as hard as we can and we barely have anything saved. I have been thinking about that. I have enough saved to buy some land, just a small piece. Maybe 20 acres out past the Johnson place. There is a section there with good grass and water access. I talked to the owner and he is willing to sell for a fair price. We could build a small cabin, start running horses. That would take years to build up, Theresa said, but he could see the spark of interest in her eyes. Maybe not as long as you think. I am good with horses and there is always demand for quality trained animals. You could continue your healing work, maybe even more so once we are established. People trust you now. We would not get rich, but we could make a good life. She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her working through the possibilities. When could we start? They bought the land in early March, signing the papers at the land office with hands that shook from excitement and terror. 20 acres of high desert grassland with a creek running through it, mountains rising in the distance. It was theirs. Kade continued working at the McCready Ranch while spending every spare moment building their cabin. Samuel McCready, perhaps softened by the romance of it all or perhaps just respecting a man who worked hard, gave him some time off and even lent him tools. Other men from town came to help too, neighbors who believed in lending a hand. Theresa worked at the store during the day but joined him every evening, helping where she could, bringing food and water. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms with a loft for sleeping, but it was solid and well built. They moved in on a warm April evening, carrying their few possessions across the threshold. That night, they lay in their own bed in their own home and watched moonlight stream through the window. "We did it," Theresa whispered. "We are just starting," Kade replied, pulling her close. He left his job at the McCready Ranch and threw himself into building their horse operation. He started with 2 mares and a good stallion, purchased with the last of his savings. It was a gamble, betting everything on his ability to breed and train quality horses. But he knew his craft, had learned from his father and years of hard work. Theresa helped when she could, learning to handle the horses with patient competence, though her primary focus remained on her healing work. People began seeking her out at the cabin, knowing she could be found there in the evenings and on Sundays. She set up a small workspace in the second room, lined the shelves with jars of herbs and remedies. Word of her skills spread beyond Hillsborough, and sometimes people rode in from neighboring ranches and settlements seeking her help. The first year was hard. They worked from dawn until long after dark, counting every penny, worried constantly that they had made a terrible mistake. But slowly, steadily, things began to improve. Kade sold 2 trained horses for good prices, and the mares both produced healthy foals. Theresa's reputation as a healer grew, and she began earning regular income. They were not prosperous, but they were making it work. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit on their small porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked about their days, about the horses or the patients or the small triumphs and frustrations. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, her hand in his, grateful for the life they were building together. On a warm evening in late September, Theresa took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Kade felt the world shift beneath him, the way it had when he pulled her from the creek, when he asked her to marry him. These moments of profound change that rewrote everything. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. I think it will come in early spring." He pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with joy and terror. A child. They were going to be parents. "Are you happy?" he asked, suddenly worried. They had not discussed children, had been too focused on survival. "I am terrified," she admitted. "But yes, I am happy. Are you?" "More than I can say." The pregnancy was not easy. Theresa continued working as long as she could, but by January she was tired all the time, her body struggling with the cold winter and the demands of the growing baby. Kade took over more of her work, delivering remedies to patients, following her instructions carefully. He worried constantly, remembering that his own mother had died bringing him into the world. "I will be fine," Theresa assured him when she caught him watching her with concern. "I know my body, I know what I am doing. Women have babies every day." "Not my woman," he said gruffly. "You are the only one I have got." She smiled and kissed him softly. "Then I promise to take very good care of her, or him." Their son was born on a bright morning in late March 1884, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the dawn. Kade stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, feeling helpless and awed by her strength. When the baby finally came, crying lustily, Theresa laughed through her tears of relief and exhaustion. "A boy," she said wonderingly. "We have a son." They named him James after Kade's father. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the first moment Kade held him, he understood love in a way he never had before. This tiny person, so vulnerable and perfect, depending on them for everything. Parenthood changed their lives completely. The work did not stop, but it had to be organized around James's needs. Theresa carried him in a sling while she tended her herbs and saw patients. Kade built a cradle that he kept in the barn so his son could nap nearby while he worked with the horses. They were exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than they had ever been. The years flowed past, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and child rearing. James grew from a baby into a toddler, then a small boy who followed his father everywhere, fascinated by the horses. The ranch grew too. Kade's reputation for training quality horses spread, and he began receiving requests from ranchers across the territory. They hired a young man to help with the heavy work and built an additional barn. When James was 3, Theresa became pregnant again. This time it was easier, her body knowing what to do. Their daughter was born in October, a tiny thing with her father's serious expression and her mother's delicate features. They named her Lily. By 1890, 8 years after Kade had pulled Theresa from the frozen creek, they had built something remarkable. Their ranch was small but successful, respected across the region. They had 2 healthy children and a third on the way. Theresa's healing practice had expanded to include teaching other women her skills, passing on the knowledge her mother had given her. They had friends in town, a place in the community, roots that went deep. On a winter evening, with snow falling softly outside and the children asleep in the loft, Theresa and Kade sat by the fire. She was knitting something small for the baby who would arrive in spring, and he was mending a bridle, their hands busy with the work that never quite ended. "Do you ever think about that day at the creek?" Theresa asked suddenly. He looked up at her. "Every time I hear water running, every time I see ice forming on the creek, every time I think about how close I came to never meeting you." "I think about it too," she said quietly. "About how my life could have ended there in that freezing water. About how everything I have now, everything we have built, would not exist if you had not been there." "We would both have had different lives," Kade said, "but I cannot imagine any life better than this one." She set down her knitting and moved to sit beside him, curling against his side the way she had that first night when they huddled together for warmth. "When I was drowning, I remember thinking this was it. This was how it ended. I was so angry because I had just lost my parents. I had just started over, and it felt so unfair to have it all taken away. And then I heard you calling to me, felt your hands pulling me out, and I thought maybe I had died after all because you seemed like some kind of answer to a prayer. I did not even know I was praying." Kade wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his throat tight with emotion. "You fought so hard to stay alive. I heard you splashing, fighting the current. You saved yourself as much as I saved you. We saved each other," she said. Every day since then, we have been saving each other in different ways." He knew what she meant. The way she encouraged him when the work felt overwhelming, the way he supported her healing practice when others still questioned a woman's skills, the way they talked through problems instead of letting resentment build, the way they laughed together even when things were hard, the way they loved each other through the ordinary struggles of building a life. Their third child, another son they named Robert, was born in April as the desert bloomed with wildflowers. Theresa's labor was quick this time, and she was up and working again within days, though Kade tried to make her rest. James, now 6 years old, took his role as big brother seriously, helping to watch his younger siblings with endearing seriousness. Lily at 2 was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, getting into everything. The ranch continued to prosper. By the mid-1890s, Kade employed 3 regular hands and sold horses as far away as Colorado and Texas. Theresa trained 2 young women as healers, teaching them everything her mother had taught her. They had expanded the cabin twice, adding rooms as their family grew. It would never be a grand house, but it was comfortable and filled with love. When James turned 10 in 1894, Kade began teaching him seriously about horse training, the way his own father had taught him. He showed his son how to approach a young horse, how to read its body language, how to build trust through patience and consistency. James had a natural gift for it, a gentle confidence that the horses responded to. Lily, at 7, showed more interest in her mother's work. She followed Theresa around, learning the names of herbs and their uses, helping to prepare remedies. Theresa taught her patiently, the same way her own mother had taught her. Robert at 4 was still mostly interested in playing, but he had his father's love of horses and his mother's compassionate heart. On the spring evening in 1895, almost 13 years to the day after Kade had pulled Theresa from the creek, they hosted a gathering at their ranch. Friends and neighbors came, filling the house and yard with laughter and conversation. Martha Morrison, now elderly but still sharp, held baby Robert on her lap and told stories about when Kade and Theresa had first met. Samuel McCready, retired now, talked about the young cowboy who had worked for him and the woman he had saved. "I knew right then you two would end up together," Martha said firmly, though everyone knew she had been among those concerned about propriety. The way he looked at her, even then, like she was something precious. "She is," Kade said simply, meeting Theresa's eyes across the crowded room. Later, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, they walked out to the creek that ran through their property. It was not the same creek where Theresa had nearly drowned, but it reminded them both of that day. The water ran clear and quick, fed by mountain snowmelt, and the moon reflected on its surface. 13 years, Theresa said. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "Both," Kade said. "That was when our life together started, but we have lived so much since then." She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her waist. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the water, the night sounds, the wind in the cottonwoods. Their children were safe and warm in the house they had built. Their ranch was thriving. Their love had deepened and matured, tested by time and hardship and found strong. "I would do it all again," Theresa said quietly. "Even knowing how hard it would be, even the scary parts. I would do it all again to end up right here." "So would I," Kade said. "Every single moment." The years continued their steady march forward. James at 16 was running much of the horse operation under his father's guidance, showing real skill and business sense. Lily at 13 was already healing minor ailments under her mother's supervision, and people were beginning to ask for her specifically. Robert at 10 was developing into a fine horseman and a good student, with dreams of becoming a veterinarian. In 1900, when Theresa was 40 and Kade 42, they stood on their porch one evening and looked out over their land. The ranch had grown to 50 acres, with 2 large barns and proper corrals. They had 8 horses in training, and James was talking about starting his own breeding program. Lily had mentioned wanting to study at a women's medical college back east, though the idea of her leaving terrified Theresa. Robert was learning everything he could from books about animal medicine. "We did all right," Kade said, his arm around Theresa's shoulders. "That scared Cowboy and the woman he pulled from the creek, we did all right." "We did better than all right," Theresa said, turning to look at him. "We built something beautiful." His hair was graying at the temples now, and lines creased his face from years in the sun. Her own auburn hair had threads of silver, and her hands were work-roughened. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the same people who had fallen in love in the harsh winter of 1882. "I love you," he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he said them. "I love you too," she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Always." Their children grew and began lives of their own. James married a woman from a neighboring ranch and started his own operation with his father's help and blessing. Lily did go east to study medicine, coming back 3 years later as one of the few female doctors in New Mexico Territory. She opened a practice in Hillsboro and married a teacher, giving Kade and Theresa their first grandchild in 1906. Robert went to veterinary school in Denver and returned to work with his brother, combining horse breeding with veterinary care. Kade and Theresa stayed on their ranch, still working though they had help now. They were in their 50s, then their 60s, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts still strong. They became the matriarch and patriarch of a growing family, gathering children and grandchildren around them for holidays and celebrations. On a cold December evening in 1912, 30 years after Kade had pulled Theresa from the frozen creek, they sat by their fire wrapped in blankets. Outside, snow fell softly, covering the land in white. They were both 62 now, their hair fully gray, their movements slower but still sure. "Do you remember," Theresa said, "that first night after you pulled me out, how we huddled together under the blankets just trying to stay alive? I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Kade said. "Fighting so hard to live, even when everything seemed hopeless." "I remember thinking you were my guardian angel," she said with a smile. "This cowboy who appeared out of nowhere and refused to let me die." "Just a man who heard splashing," he said, but he was smiling too. "Just a man who saved me in every way a person can be saved," she corrected. "You gave me life that night, and you have given me a beautiful life every day since." He pulled her closer, and they sat in the firelight, watching the flames dance. Their children were grown and thriving. Their grandchildren were healthy and happy. The ranch they had built from nothing continued strong under James's management. Theresa's healing work had touched hundreds of lives, and Lily was carrying on that tradition with modern medical knowledge added to old wisdom. "We did good," Kade said softly. "Better than I ever imagined that night when I was just trying to keep you warm enough to survive until morning." "We did wonderful," Theresa agreed, "and we are not done yet." They lived many more years, growing old together with grace and humor. They saw their grandchildren grow and some of them marry. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933 with a massive gathering of family and friends. 4 generations coming together to honor the couple whose love story had started with freezing water and a cowboy's quick response. Kade passed away in his sleep in 1935 at the age of 77, Theresa beside him holding his hand. She grieved deeply, but took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 3 years, still sharp and engaged with life, still teaching and healing and loving her family. When Theresa died peacefully in her sleep in 1938, the family buried her beside Kade on a hill overlooking their ranch. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood around the grave, remembering the stories they had been told about the frozen creek and the drowning woman and the cowboy who heard splashing. About how love could start in the most desperate circumstances and grow into something that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The ranch continued under their descendants' care, and in Hillsborough, the story of Kade and Theresa became legend. The tale of the cowboy who saved the drowning woman and how they built an empire of love from that frozen December day. Their story was told and retold, inspiring other young couples, reminding people that sometimes the greatest love stories start with the simplest act of human kindness and courage. And through it all, the creek continued flowing through the land they had loved, its water running clear and quick, carrying with it the echo of the day it had almost taken a life, but instead had brought two souls together, giving them the gift of each other and a love that would echo through generations.